Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reading Bart Ehrman. Today, we're going to be reading 4 pages. We're all reading our way through 4 pages of his book. We'll be reading about half of it and then summarizing other parts where he's just giving an illustration of the point he's just made. So, Matthew, do you want to take us away under the title on page 12 of From Seminary to Pulpit?
Yep, away we go. He begins, one of the most amazing and perplexing features of mainstream Christianity is that seminarians who learn the historical critical method in their Bible classes appear to forget all about it when it comes time for them to be pastors. They are taught critical approaches to Scripture, they learn about discrepancies and contradictions, they discover all sorts of historical errors and mistakes. They come to realize that it is difficult to know whether Moses existed or what Jesus actually said and did. They find that there are other books that were at one time considered canonical, but that ultimately did not become part of Scripture, for example, other Gospels and Apocalypses. They come to recognize that a good number of the books of the Bible are pseudonymous, for example, written in the name of an apostle by somebody else. That in fact we don't have the original copies of any of the biblical books, but only copies made centuries later, all of which have been altered. They learn all this, and yet when they enter church ministry, they appear to put back on the shelf. For reasons I will explore in the conclusion, pastors are, as a rule, reluctant to teach what they learned about the Bible in seminary. Goodness, what have you got to say about that, Sam?
Okay, well, my first point is, so far we've been reading and he's been saying Christians don't know this, but now he's saying that people who go to college, which are thousands and like hundreds of thousands of Christians, they do know it. So it's sort of is flipped around, and he's saying, no, Christians do know this,
but they're
Christians
hiding it.
Do know it. So that's my first point. We're saying something different to what he said before, and then he's just stating things as facts, which we've just seen are false. So he's saying they go to college and they learn about all the historical errors and the mistakes and the contradictions and everything like that. Well, for everyone who's watched our previous episodes, we've gone through every single example that he's given, and everyone's been false.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Everyone's been false. So, he's saying, oh, yeah, here they all are. But we've taken the time over 14 episodes to go through all of them. Not one has been true. Okay.
And a lot of them have been very.
You were saying before you think there's another reason why ministers may not bring this up with their congregations.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, maybe the reason that they don't bring up this with their congregations is simply that they don't think that the things he said are true. Exactly. It's one thing to study. This scholar says that Moses didn't write this, or we can't really know Jesus said this or that, or there's these errors or contradictions in the Bible. It's another thing to actually examine those and educate yourself in those things and to find those objections unconvincing, which is the process we've gone through in several episodes, I think, and I think shown pretty well that Ehrman hasn't made a compelling case for those alleged contradictions and falsehoods or whatever that the Bible apparently says. And so he hasn't made his case. This is a real scattergun accusation at the whole culture of conservative Christianity, which is very false. It's contrary to our experience of going to Bible college or seminary, isn't it? We've engaged all sorts of historical, critical issues and very forthrightly had to face, here are the major objections people have to this or whatever the case is. And we've had to think about them and engage them and weigh them up and simply come to the conclusion that there aren't substantial objections to the trustworthiness of the Bible, actually, when you look at the details. It's very easy to do what Ehrman's done here, which is to write a paragraph of rapid-fire accusations and not substantiate them, because it takes a lot of effort and energy to answer those things, but in detail. But he hasn't provided any evidence. He's just made accusations.
Yeah, and the evidence we've seen that he has given is just been false. It just doesn't even doesn't stand the ground. Yeah. All right, we'll keep going. He then gives an example of this. So I'm not going to read out all of page 13, It's a bit much for the video, I think. But he then gives his own personal experience of being a teacher in a church, and he was giving some lectures, and he was giving the historical critical approach, and a lady comes up to him and says, "Why have I never been taught this before?"
Yeah.
And so that's sort of where he goes. So it's a personal experience of what he's just said. And I will take us from the bottom of page 13.
Mm-hmm.
And he's now trying to explain why the pastor of the church, didn't teach this to his congregation. He said, was it because he didn't think they were ready for it? A patronizing attitude that is disturbingly common. Was he afraid to make waves? Was he afraid that historical information might destroy the faith of his congregation? Was he afraid that church leaders might not take kindly to the dissemination of such knowledge? Did church leaders actually put pressure on him to stick to the devotional meaning of the Bible in his preaching and teaching? Was he concerned about job security? I never found out. Come on, this is comical.
It's just, again, that's even worse. Scattergun, just let's throw some stuff out there, make accusations.
Yeah, it's real conspiracy. This is conspiracy stuff, this last sentence really gets me. Did they put pressure on him?
Oh, I know.
Was he concerned about job security? I never found out. He doesn't know. He's got no evidence for anything he's saying here.
But he publishes it in a book.
Bart Ehrman, I hope you read this stuff of what he's saying.
Yeah.
This is outrageous.
Yeah.
This is an outrageous statement he's making here. I've got no evidence. I've got no idea what happened, but, job security. Maybe they'll get him.
But it must be a conspiracy, yeah. Well, an alternative, more sensible explanation, perhaps, might be that this gentleman he's referring to went to seminary and learned about these things and found the objections unconvincing, as we have in our videos we've already seen, and so didn't teach nonsense and falsehoods to his congregation. I mean, he could tell people, some people disagree with this, or there's this claim about this passage or whatever from time to time, and say why he thinks it. And that's very helpful, I think. In sermons, for example, we might say, some people claim that this didn't happen or whatever, and we'll answer that. And I've seen pastors do that lots of times, which is good and responsible. But the way he's portrayed it is just dishonest. He said they're afraid of disseminating knowledge and that historical information, but he's treating it as though he's established these things as kind of infallible truths about the Bible that everybody just accepts. But it's just not the case. It strikes me, while Ehrman's throwing his conspiracy theory out and saying, why on earth won't these conservative Christians tell people about all these objections to the Bible? I just want to reverse it and say, Bart Ehrman, I'm reading your book here, and you're pretending that conservative Christians don't have serious responses to these things. Why are you afraid to put that out there? Why are you afraid to direct people to educated, well-informed, historical, critical, conservative sources that answer these things and say, hey, people, there's another side to this. Why don't you go and weigh it up? And I can direct people to one now. Because so many scholars have been concerned that Bart Ehrman is misrepresenting the Bible on a whole host of issues. There's actually a website called theehrmanproject.com, and it consists of short videos by accredited, well-respected and published New Testament scholars and theological, like Bible scholars, who answer a lot of the objections and points that Ehrman claims. And they demonstrate that it just doesn't hold water. And you can go and look at that and you can weigh it up yourself, and you should. But the point is, why is Ehrman hiding from people that this kind of thing exists?
Yeah.
That's his conspiracy.
He's creating the impression that Christians have no answer to these things.
That's right. Yeah.
And so he's stating it, and he doesn't quote any Christian responses, so there mustn't be any. Right?
It's just historical information. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a couple of other books for people who are interested.
Yeah.
So Paul Barnett is the New Testament history.
Yeah.
Excellent book where he just takes you through all the historical evidence, because contrary to what Bart Ehrman says, Christians love history.
Absolutely.
Right? We're right into history. And books like Is the New Testament History by Paul Barnett. John Dixon has got a whole stack of books. Here's one of his, The Christ Files, but he's got another one called Is Jesus History, and they're excellent. And then here's one by Michael Bird on the Gospel of the Lord. I just finished reading this one. And all of these books deal very seriously with historical questions, and they show that Christians have got good grounds for what they believe. And so, like you deal with a book like this, it's going as far as you can go into the academic discussion. And the point is that when you actually do that, it backs up what the Bible's saying. We have evidence from outside of the Bible confirming what's in it. And so contrary to what he's saying, even with my own preaching, I was preaching on Mark 1 and I was referring to John the Baptist. And so I was quoting from Josephus and what he said about John the Baptist. And, that's what I had when I was growing up and was listening to preachers. It didn't seem strange to me. So I was always engaging with history. So, it's just not true what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very dramatic distortion of reality, and listeners really should ask themselves why Ehrman's presenting such a one-sided view of things, and not even just one-sided, such a distorted view of things. I think when you look at the responses that he's had to his views, I don't know how he can, in good faith, say some of the things he said, honestly, especially about what conservative Christians allegedly hold, which isn't the case.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to finish up on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We were going to finish with this section. As Sam said, there's 4 pages here, so we just chose some bits. So this is the bottom of page 14, near the end of this section. Ehrman says, my students have a range of reactions to these views. That is the views that they learned in college about the Bible, its contradictions and all that sort of thing. Many of my more conservative students are like me at that age, certain of the Bible's absolute truthfulness and wary of anyone who might call it into question. Some of these students refuse to listen. It's almost as if they cover their ears and hum loudly so they don't have to hear anything that might cause them to doubt their cherished beliefs about the Bible. Others are eager to break away from the confines of the church and religion entirely, devouring the information I give as if it provides them a license to disbelieve. I personally don't think much of think either reaction, the radical rejection or the all too eager embrace of the new perspective on the Bible, is ideal. What I prefer are students who carefully study the material, consider it thoughtfully, question some of its and their own assumptions and conclusions, reflect on how it might affect the way they look at the Bible and the Christian religion on which they were raised, and cautiously consider how it might affect them personally.
Okay. Well, in one sense, I agree a lot more with how he's finished up there.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of students humming loudly and, I don't want to hear this, like that picture he creates. Again, it's a mockery, isn't it? Like he's just mocking.
And it's the assumption that if people disagree with him, they must be doing that.
Yeah.
That's the only, it can't be that they find him unconvincing. They must just be humming loudly and ignoring facts.
And it couldn't possibly be that there are answers to the questions that he's raising.
Totally. Yep.
Right. But I actually do agree where he finishes up. And that is, he says, you don't just want to have a complete rejection of the Bible, but you also want to take into account the historical evidence that's out there as well. And so I agree with that. And so, he puts up this, two ways. There's the rejection. I don't think either. I personally don't think either reaction, the radical rejection, nor the all too eager embrace of the new perspective on the Bible is ideal. And, he talks about how, rather, you should examine these questions and think about it carefully. And in one sense, I want to go, I want to do that. And that's why I'm recommending that people read these books, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
You go to your Christian bookshop, there are plenty of books to help you do this. And to help, read the Bible in its broader context, its broader historical context.
Yeah, and just to, I think perhaps a good place to end is it's worth considering, because Ehrman's just said, he presented this picture that people who don't present his view must be closing their ears and hiding the truth from their congregations and that sort of thing. I think everybody should consider perhaps the leaders who don't teach Ehrman's views have done exactly the thing he's just recommended. And they've come to the conclusion that the Bible is trustworthy because they've looked at it in detail, and they simply have come to a different conclusion than him based on the evidence, which is what Sam and I know have done. We've got conservative views of the Bible. I don't think we're ignorant of the kinds of things that Ehrman raises. I mean, of all the things in this book I've certainly heard before, and simply have found unconvincing once looking at the evidence. But yeah, like Ehrman, we'd say, look at the evidence and just don't assume that people who come to conservative answers haven't looked at the evidence themselves and used their brain and looked at the facts.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we'll finish up there. We shall see you next week. So God bless. All the best. I'll see you then, Matthew.
Thank you. Bye-bye.